Hey, what's up everyone? How's it going? Ice, Shards, Sorc. This is the build that everyone's playing. There's a couple other builds out there. You can play Firewall if you're in hardcore. You get with the warmth, you get a lot of regen, and using the Flame Shield enchantment, that's like kind of a hardcore recommended build. There are variations on Ice Shard that go even harder into pure barrier. They sacrifice a little bit of the early glass cannon for going all the way into just barrier and defense. But that's like really just like 3 to 5 points difference versus what I have here. And then there's Arc Lash, which has really, really good single target, but honestly, it's pretty clunky feeling. I really didn't like it. And then there's some like interesting builds where people are playing around with Blizzard and doing stuff like that. But honestly, nothing that I've seen or tried compares to this build. What you see in the background right now is me doing a tier 21 nightmare dungeon. This is actually my first attempt at doing any tier dungeon higher than 15. And it went very smoothly. Well, relatively smoothly. My character at this time, I'm a little bit better now, but my character at this time only had 2,500 life. I had significantly worse gear than I have right now, and it was a breeze. This Nightmare Dungeon had some really hard mods, including Backstabber, which makes you take 1.5 times extra damage from behind, which you'll see me get one shot twice during this dungeon. But besides that, it is very manageable. The nice thing about this build is it is ridiculously good on burst damage and clear. Later on, it does have really good sustain on its damage. Once you get higher lucky hit, that's really the thing that we're using for mana sustain. Once you get that, then the mana sustain becomes really good. Then you get CDR and you can chain your stuff a lot better. But even early on, with 0 required legendary affixes and 0 required uniques, it felt really good. And I could tell I was doing like double, triple damage than I was even Arc Lash, at least for regular dungeon clearing. That's my long intro right there. This is exactly what I wanted, honestly. This is what I wanted when I picked a sorceress, Sorc. I'm just gonna say Sorc. I'm gonna call it sorceress all the time. I can't help it. But yeah, when I picked a Sorc, like a magic user that has really good crowd control, incredible burst damage, and really good mobility, allowing you to outplay your opponents. I actually haven't taken this into PvP yet, but I can see it being pretty fun in there. So yeah, without further ado, this is the meta build for a reason. In my opinion, this is the best sorcerer build in the game, bar none. Like, there's nothing that's even close in my opinion. I know Arc Lash or whatever is okay, but in terms of well-rounded build that just feels really good to play, honestly, it's like the platonic ideal of what I wanted when I played this game. It really saved the game for me. I was like not feeling too good about the game, with my build kind of feeling crappy in the middle of World Tier 3. And this saved it for me. So let's go over the build, go into the details, what it is. Again, I did not invent this build. I have a couple tweaks here for my own taste. There's plenty of stuff out here, but maybe my take on it will give you a little bit of additional information. So yeah, let's do it. All right, so what's the build? What's the theory behind it? Why does it work? And why is it so damn strong? So the main skill that we're building around here is called Ice Shards. It's an Ice Shards build. Crazy that, right? What Ice Shards is just a projectile shotgun effect. It is a straight line honestly machine gun, not shotgun. Straight line machine gun effect. Shoots a bunch of Ice Shards in a straight line, just like this. It gives you this like little machine gun effect. It has a built-in multiplier for doing increased damage to frozen enemies, 25% more. Enhanced Ice Shards has a 40% chance to ricochet, so this gives you some decent clear just with even your single target skill. And it always ricochets off of frozen enemies, so obviously we want to freeze as much as possible. Destructive Ice Shards is what I recommend most of the time, unless you have a way to generate vulnerable all the time more easily. Doing more vulnerable damage and scaling that is a big part of the damage that we're doing here. And so making sure that the enemies we're attacking are always vulnerable is very important for our damage. Since Ice Shards hits 5 times, you only actually have to hit them once, any single target that you're attacking, right? So obviously it won't trigger if it's off of a ricochet, but any single target that you're attacking with Ice Shards will, just trigger that vulnerable. And then they take 20% increased damage, scaled even more by your increased vulnerable damage. You're going to look for that on your gear. Now, there's the barrier variation of Ice Shards that takes greater Ice Shards. And the cool thing about this is it treats the enemies as if they're always frozen. So it's always ricocheting. So you can basically just always stand back and only use Ice Shards. But I like to play a little bit more up close and personal and use other ways to get freeze. And then this way, it actually allows us to always make sure that the enemy is vulnerable, right? The big problem is we don't have a way to guarantee that the enemy is always vulnerable when we're doing single target bossing. And that's why I don't really like greater Ice Shards unless you have another source of it. So that's really the core of the build, is like this is our single target. It has a good base lucky hit chance at 21%. It has really solid damage, and then it does increase damage against frozen enemies. And then it makes the enemies vulnerable, and it's just really, really strong. And so you can see mine is level 8 out of 5. You know, I want to scale that as much as possible. We are using Frostbolt here for our mana resource generator. Ideally, we solve our mana a little bit later, and we can actually get rid of Frostbolt. But at the moment, and especially early on when you're putting this build together, this is necessary. We don't really care about the enhanced Frostbolt, and then when it hits a chilled enemy, which Frostbolt always chills, it'll generate mana, and just use this to go back to Ice Shards ASAP. We're using Firebolt right here. This is, I don't know, almost an exploit, where I'm pretty sure basically every single Sorc build wants to use Firebolt and the Firebolt enhancement. What the Firebolt enhancement does is it says every single direct damage from any skill will cause the enemy to be burning for 8 seconds. We actually don't care about that burning damage value. The reason why we go for this is because we then later on go into Devouring Blaze, which deals 30% increased critical strike damage as a multiplier, right? So when you crit, it's a 30% more damage multiplier if the enemy is burning. And if the enemy is also immobilized, which we go for a source of immobilize here, that's actually 75% more damage. It's a gigantic more damage multiplier. So this is the big thing. Like a lot of builds are using this. Like pretty much every build does this for more damage. And then later on in our Paragon and all that, we're going to go into even more damage against burning enemies. That's really one of the best ways to scale damage on a Sorc right now. 1 point in Devastation and 1 point into Elemental Dominance. The thing to really pay attention to is you see where it says your core skills deal 3% X increased damage. That is the size of a multiplier. If it says 3% plus, that would be a 3% additive plus on whatever your base number is, right? So the way that you want to think about it is every additive multiplier is just adding up one single number, and then the additional multipliers, they're all different multipliers, right? So if you have 100 damage, and then every single 30% multiplier on top of that is 100 times 30 for 130, 130 times 30 on top of that, and et cetera, and so on, right? So very often investing too much into a single multiplier doesn't really give you too much value. But if you can just hit a little bit for 1 point, you actually get like an outsized value on it, right? Because it's just its own multiplier. You know, ideally, I probably would, you know, this number is so small that it's probably better off to go to 3 points later on if you can. For just 2 points, this is actually pretty nice. A little bit more mana and a little bit more of this. You know, if you see Devastation or Elemental Dominance on your gear, it's definitely nice to get. For example, here, I have 1 point into Glass Cannon from my gear, and exact same situation, right? Glass Cannon is its own multiplier, and we take more damage too, and we don't really like that. So I think 1 or 2 points in a Glass Cannon is really nice, but going into like 5, if you go, you know, invest a lot into gear, I think this might have like very diminishing returns. We use Flame Shield. Flame Shield is just amazing. It makes you totally invulnerable. So a thing that people do, and I'll just, you know, cut this off at the chase. A lot of people go into Ice Armor later. A lot of people don't use Deep Freeze, but the way that I play right now, when you're playing harder content than your character can handle, when you're doing solo content, I really think what I'm doing right now is the right way. You know, if you solved mana, you don't have to use Frostbolt anymore. Or if you're doing group play or you're feeling very, very, you know, safe, then you can probably get rid of Deep Freeze. But I find Deep Freeze incredibly invaluable right now for at least what I'm doing. I'm doing higher tier Nightmare dungeons. I was level 58 in tier 4 world doing Hell Floods and Whispers and all that. So for the way that I'm playing right now, I really think that Deep Freeze is pretty much mandatory. So this point from Ice Armor is just from gear. Later on, this is a thing you can replace Frostbolt or whatever if you want to, but this is just whatever. Anyway, we use Flame Shield. It makes you 100% immune. I only have 1 point into it. The other point is from gear. You run 25% faster, and it heals for 50% of your missing life. So if you're at 50% life, you go to 75% life. So it's a free instant heal, go invulnerable, and we actually go for an affix for Flame Shield as well, which actually enables us to do even more damage. So yeah, Shimmering Flame Shield is just absolutely mandatory. I don't think Mystical Flame Shield ever has a use in the game, considering how strong Shimmering is. I only have 1 point here in Teleport. The other one's from gear. Teleport is Teleport, and then we go to Shimmering, so we gain damage reduction. This is obviously like pretty mandatory to play Sorc. 3 points in Precision Magic. Lucky Hit is what enables our mana sustain, and we'll get to that in a second. We want 3 points in Precision Magic no matter what. And then we want to go to Protection for the biggest barrier possible whenever we use a cooldown. We actually have a lot of cooldowns that reset all the time. We use them very often. So this is actually a big part of our life sustain. Speaking of which, we have Elemental Attunement right here. Unlucky Hit. Critical strikes have a 10% chance to reset the cooldown of a defensive skill, which includes Flame Shield, Teleport, and Frost Nova right here. You can see I have 9 points in a Frost Nova. That's because I value it very, very, very much. The main reason why we use Frost Nova here, and we want to go into Mystical Frost Nova, is to make the enemies frozen and vulnerable. Remember that ice shards will always ricochet off of frozen enemies. And then we have all of the bonus damage to vulnerable enemies as well. We want enemies to be vulnerable all the time. And Frost Nova will make even bosses vulnerable up to 6 seconds. And if we kill enemies with Frost Nova up to 4 enemies, then that will reduce that cooldown by 4 seconds. With where I'm at right now, that'll give me a 10.1 second cooldown on my Frost Nova, allowing me to use it pretty often, and I can use it every single pack of monsters. We don't use any of the other conjurations. I don't know if there's a good conjuration build at all right now. I was using Lightning Spear and the Crackling Energy build, but yeah, I don't know. It would be really cool if there's like a nice Ice Blades build or something, but anyway, just lamenting right there. Then we're using Icy Veil, just barriers last longer. Barriers are what keep us alive. That's where our life sustain comes from. And we go for legendary affixes that make our barriers, we do more damage when we have barriers. So that's really important. And then, like I said before, Devouring Blaze. If we immobilize and burn the enemy, that's 75% more damage. That is absolutely gigantic on our critical strikes. Like I said, I like Deep Freeze. In my opinion, this is the coolest skill in the game. You become fully immune and invulnerable for 4 seconds. It does decent damage. It doesn't do incredible damage, but it does decent damage. And if an enemy gets chilled enough, then they become frozen, unlike Path of Exile. Chill and freeze are actually directly related in this game. We learned this yesterday. Almost all the time, Deep Freeze will tick enough times that all enemies will be frozen when it's over. Look and listen to this. Like, why would you want to play without that? I mean, come on. Like the snake looks so stupid. Come on, let's get real. Kind of disappointed that there isn't anything else in the game that to me looks and sounds and feels as cool as Deep Freeze. It's part of the reason why I like this build so much. And then last up, we are using Avalanche right here. On lucky hit, your frost skills have up to a 10% chance to make your next cast, we only care about ice shards here, consume no mana and deal 40% increased damage. If the target is vulnerable, that's a 20% chance hit. So for example, I believe I have about 70% lucky hit on my ice shards right now. On a 20% proc off of that, that is a 14% chance on my ice shards to make my next cast of ice shards cost no mana and deal 40% increased damage. And it actually counts for 2 with one of the legendary affixes that we use here. 14% of the time, your next 2 casts will be free. And that adds up to being really, really good for mana sustain. Eventually, ideally, we do want to go into Shatter. After freeze expires, enemies explode for 25% of the damage you dealt to them while frozen. This is obviously incredible. Hit a monster really, really hard while he's frozen. He explodes. The whole screen will explode. Tons and tons of damage. However, we really need Avalanche right now, particularly for single target sustain, basically necessary. But, you can always try to unspec it temporarily, see how your mana is, and then go back to it.
Hi there, quick little interjection in my original recording. Apologies for the quality. I'm on the editing computer. I missed talking about the enchantments. The 2 that we use are Firebolt, which I did mention. This makes sure that every enemy that we hit is burning. But the one that I did not mention is that we are also using Ice Shards. Of course, it's an Ice Shards build. And what this does is when you freeze an enemy, it'll automatically conjure Ice Shards and hit them. So this is why I mentioned at one point that when we freeze an enemy, sometimes we don't even have to manually cast Ice Shards. It'll just automatically shatter the entire screen. And that's really it. There's definitely some different stuff that you could do. If you get points in Blizzard, you go for the Blizzard affixes. There's a lot of modifications that you can do. You can do that to get tankier, but definitely the basic loadout, you want to go for Firebolt and Ice Shards. Anyway, back to the video.
And yeah, that's the passive points. That's try to explain the mechanics behind the build. Let's show how it works. Before I show an example, I do want to go into a little bit, show you guys a couple of things that are going on here. The big thing is I did get lucky. I found the Raiment of the Infinite. This is basically the best in slot for the body armor. What it does is your teleport will pull enemies in and stun them for up to 3 seconds. Teleport's cooldown is increased by 20%, a little sad, but the upside here is way, way too good. Also has increased damage to close stunned enemies, gives glass cannon, and intelligence. Mine's a lower level, it's only sacred armor. Yeah, stunning the enemies for 2.5 seconds, pulling them in, really allows you to get advantage of all those shatters. Because the way that our skill works is it's a shotgun that then can ricochet, and if all the enemies are next to each other and they're shattering, then we get extra benefit off of that. On top of that, kind of what's going with this is enemies that die while frozen with the Ice Heart Braze have a up to 20% chance to unleash an additional Frost Nova to continue chaining more damage and more freezing and more vulnerable. This is a bottom rolled one, lower level, but obviously this would be really good later on, up to 12% freeze duration, damage to injured, frozen enemies, etc. Obviously really, really good. This is what you really want to go for, is a Raiment of the Infinite and an Ice Heart Braze. This makes your clear some of the best in the game. And then the other legendary affixes and all that, we'll go over that after I show you guys a little bit of an example. So the skills that I have here, I have Flame Shield, which I just use as a get out of jail. But also, I guess everything is kind of connected. I got to go into it. We have this affix here. I actually just added this about an hour ago. I was kind of waiting for a pair of boots to put it on. It allows you to move unhindered through enemies, and enemies that you move through are immobilized. Remember that we get bonus damage to immobilized enemies from that Pyromancer mastery. So this actually makes us do 75% more damage with our crits against our enemies. So this is really nice. Teleport, of course. We want to teleport into a pack of monsters. Like, I like how dynamic and just like you can pull a bunch of monsters, teleport in the middle, suck them in, and then just explode the whole screen. And so we want to teleport into a pack of monsters and pull everyone in and stun them. If you want to double stack it, then you can do the flame shield, immobilize them as well. And then we can make the enemies vulnerable, immobilized, and stunned, within half a second. Then we get really big explosive bonus damage on them. And the big thing here that's enabling that is with Frost Nova. So, Frost Nova starts out at a pretty high cooldown. That's why we want to get as many ranks and as much cooldown recovery rate for this. The main flow here is teleport in, Frost Nova, and then sometimes you don't even have to cast your ice shards, but just to make sure you clear them out, one ice shards, everything's going to shatter and explode. Frostbolt is really only, if you need to, if you're low on mana, if you're running away, that's all it's there for. And then Deep Freeze is basically, a get out of jail free card. You freeze the entire screen, you go invulnerable, you can use your potions while you're using Deep Freeze. You can use your potions and heal up, let your teleport cooldown get ready, get your flame shield cooldown ready. If you're ever caught in a tough situation, it's kind of like your panic button. If you're trying to go as quickly as possible, you can do Frost Nova one room, then you can use your Deep Freeze the next room, and then Frost Nova, wait a little bit, Frost Nova, and then the next room Deep Freeze again. And that way you can really chain your rooms a lot more quickly as well. But yeah, let's hopefully there's something with a little bit of density here to show just kind of how awesome this is. How deep is this room? All right, not too bad, but watch this. In, boom, and then everything just dies right away. And then, oh crap, I don't have cooldowns. I'm a little scared. Then I can just press Deep Freeze, and it's the entire screen. Like, no exaggeration, entire screen. Things die like that. If you get a little scared, press your Flame Shield. If your mana gets bad, if you didn't get any good procs of Avalanche, you could be in the situation where you have to use Frostbolt and you're a little sad. But then once that's ready, you can always just press Frost Nova, one ice shards, and that kills almost everything in the game. Just to simplify this a little bit, to try to show the damage, I'll try to find an elite in here. Give me one sec. Just gonna try to kite as many monsters together as I can. All right, this looks pretty good. So in Frost Nova, one ice shards. That was one ice shards. and remember, I am level 66 and a level 73 zone right now, and I can do it again, right? And then like, oh, I'm a little scared. I press my Deep Freeze. Everything is safe. We're good. And then we can just walk away. We're not scared of anything. It's basically exactly what I wanted when I first made a character in this game. When I want to play a wizard or a sorcerer in really any game, they captured it really well with this one build. Now, much to my chagrin, the other builds didn't feel really good. Now, the crackling energy when the cooldowns were up did feel really good. I think that felt like, I really felt like an avatar of lightning. I think that's what I said in the video. Like, outside of the cooldowns, it felt like a wet noodle and it felt pretty bad. This one, the cooldowns are up, even with moderate gear. The cooldowns are up often enough, and you always have, unless you spam everything and you just get really unlucky, as long as you maintain and sustain your cooldowns in a clean enough fashion, it just feels so good. And you feel like you have control. Like, that, like, if you died or you get yourself in a tough situation, you probably didn't set up your cooldowns. You didn't approach the encounter in a thoughtful enough way. And there's always a way, like, and the thing that I always want from, like, any wizard class is, like, to be able to just, like, group up the entire screen and blow it up. Like, that's what I'm looking for. And that's what this class does. So yeah, anyway, hopefully that's enough of a demonstration. That is the flow, and that's what the passive points were. Let's go into what affixes that I'm using. There's other affixes out there. There's plenty of other stuff that you can kind of play around with. I'm just going to show you guys with what I have and what's working for me and what I really enjoy here. So, like I said before, Raiment of the Infinite, pulling all those enemies in, stunning them with the teleport. Really, really good. Iceheart Braze as well, making those enemies that die while frozen. There's a good chance that they explode. Now, this is bottom rolled. I really want a better roll here. Like, to the point where this is so bottom rolled that I might want to look into, if I find a really good pair of other pants, I'll probably consider putting those on until I find a better version of this. So those are the two uniques that I have, and I do recommend. I like both of them. And then in terms of stats that we care about the most, the order of operations, the preferences that I say, is the number one is probably lucky hit. The biggest thing that you're going to run into until you get higher lucky hit is your mana sustain is going to be really bad. So get that lucky hit as high as possible. I used to have more. I lost a little bit in a couple recent gear changes, but I am currently at 31% additional lucky hit. So the way that this works is my ice shards is at 21 plus another 31, putting me at 52% lucky hit on my ice shards. Not too bad. Ice shards hits a ton. I'm actually not 100% sure if it rolls, per attack or per hit, but either way, 52% lucky hit is pretty good. I used to have 70%, but I lost some. And again, right, the reason why we do that is we want to proc the lucky hit for avalanche right here. And it's also pretty good for elemental attunement, getting a little bit more of that teleport, your frost nova, etc. The next stat that I would recommend is cooldown reduction, because all of our skills that really enable what we're doing here to work is the cooldown. Frost Nova starts with a pretty high cooldown. I think it might even be like 25 seconds. It's something pretty high. And every time that you walk into a pack of monsters and your Frost Nova's not up, it feels really bad. Like really bad. If you don't have Frost Nova or Deep Freeze, there's a good chance you have teleport, but yeah, like there's a lot of, as soon as you get into those harder dungeons, they put up the walls. You're going to walk into a lot of like fears and freezes and stuff like that. There's going to be so much CC that you really want to save Flame Shield for your final panic button. So you want to press this as little as possible, unless you know exactly what you're doing and you're in control there and you're using it for the immobilize. Because of that, cooldown reduction is, I think, just number 2 right underneath lucky hit. After that would probably be critical strike chance. Because of that pyromancy node that gives us up to 75% more damage against burning and immobilized enemies. On crit, we really want to crit as much as possible. We want to scale that critical damage. That's why we're using an emerald in our weapon. So it's a really big thing that we're going to go for here. Lucky hit, cooldown recovery, and then critical strike chance, critical strike damage, and then any other damage, defense, whatever you're going for after that. On my gloves here, I do have this lucky hit mod. Speaking of lucky hit and mana, up to a 5% chance to restore up to 21%. This one's bottom rolled. Up to 21% of your primary resource, which for me is 21 mana. So 5% of time on the lucky hit. If I had 50% lucky hit, 2.5% of the time that I hit, I get 21 mana back. I'm hitting a bunch with a lot of different skills that will add up over time. And I definitely recommend looking for this mod as well. And then the next mod, if you find it, this is a less common mod. I haven't seen it a ton, but mana cost reduction as well. Mana is a pain in the butt. I don't see this mod too often, but mana cost reduction is just really, really good. If you get enough mana cost reduction, then you can start to scale off of the mana passives and look for other stuff on the passive tree as well. And then levels of Ice Shard and level of Frost Nova are probably the next two after that, with the critical strike damage and all that. And then any other source of damage that you can get, damage to slowed enemies, immobilized enemies, stunned enemies. We're doing all of those ailments, vulnerable damage, stuff like that, critical strike damage. We're doing all of those different types of damage. We're stacking all of those ailments. So anything that does more damage in that fashion is what you want to go for. Okay, and then in terms of the affixes that I'm using here, these might not be exactly the best, but I have looked at all of the affixes, and this is the combination that's working for me right now. Yeah, definitely a shame that this is bottom rolled. I got to find a better roll here. But damaging an elite enemy grants you a barrier up to 5,500 damage for 10 seconds every 30 seconds. That's pretty good. Like currently, I'm at 3,800 life at level 66. This is a barrier up to, 150% of my life, which is pretty crazy. A 10-second barrier, 30% of the time, you can have 150% more of your life, at least at my current level. That's pretty wild. We get all the other benefits from having a barrier, which we'll get to in a second. Anything that gives us a barrier is really good. This one, I think, is probably the first one that you want to aim for, is the Avalanche Key passive. Now applies to one additional cast. This is what I said earlier. Unlucky hit, your next Ice Shards will be free. This one makes it the next 2 Ice Shards are free, which is a big boon to your mana sustain. Can't use boots that don't have movement speed. So that's really limited me on the pairs of boots that I've looked at. Maybe there's a world where I end up, giving up on movement speed, but I just can't do it. I actually think the boot base here is really interesting. This is my favorite one. Every attack reduces your evade cooldown by 1.2 seconds. I don't know if this gets higher later on, but I actually find that my evade is available all the time. Right? Like 1.2 seconds, the cooldown on evade is only 5 seconds, right? So if you just attack 3 times, like just 3 attacks, right? And that's 3.6 seconds off of your evade. By the time you did those 3 attacks, your evade's ready again, right? So you can evade, attack, evade. And you basically always have it up. This gives you incredible mobility. For me, I think this might be my best in slot, like ideal boot implicit. I'm going to be really sad when I find a pair of boots. I have to use something else that doesn't have this. On my staff here, this is kind of a weird imprint. My staff is pretty cracked. It has damage to crowd-controlled enemies, close enemies. Distant enemies doesn't really matter, but, sometimes we're doing full-screen Ice Shards, and damage to stunned enemies, right? So when I teleport in, right? Like this is how crazy it is, right? When I teleport in, they are stunned and close and crowd controlled. This is giving me 170% increased damage just off of the teleport in by itself with using the Raiment of the Infinite. Absolutely cracked rolls on this. 180 intelligence is actually a gigantic amount of intelligence for me. Intelligence is what scales the sorcerer's damage, and so you really want to get that where you can. Unfortunately, resistances don't really work very well right now. That's kind of the downside of this class is we are squishier than we're supposed to be. It feels like the resistance equation was appropriated or misaligned or something. Yeah, we want to go for armor here, and that's why I'm using skulls. I'm not really going for resistances anywhere. I basically ignore everything that says resistances. Everything that I've read says that res is bad. Get it where you can, like, you know, if it's free, but you actually want to prioritize armor most of the time because res apparently has like really, really bad diminishing returns. In terms of what I have imprinted on this, the core skills having 80% increased crit strike with 100 mana. This is nice. When I cast it with max mana, I have basically 100% crit chance, right? Like the crit chance that I currently have, my base crit chance, and we can see it is additive, right? We see that plus sign. It's not multiplicative, it's additive. So my current crit chance is 25, so 25 plus 80. I have over 100% chance to crit when I use my Ice Shards at full mana. So the cool thing is, Ice Shards is our only spell that costs mana. This is the only thing. So when I teleport in, I Frost Nova, I use my Flame Shield, whatever, that first Ice Shards 100% of the time always will crit. And especially with scaling our lucky hit as high as possible, then we can trigger, you know, that gives us a lot of benefit from scaling our lucky hit off of something like Elemental Attunement. So when we lucky hit and when we crit, 10% of those are going to reset one of our defensive skills, which could be our Frost Nova. We get a free Frost Nova, right? And then just crit is a big source of our damage anyway, right? So this is really, really nice. Is it the best in slot? I don't know. When you're doing single target, you know, you're fighting a boss, you have low mana most of the time. I kind of take it or leave it, but you know, there's a world where I end up with a lot more mana and we can kind of sustain it a lot better. On the amulet, this is really good. This is a multiplier, up to 38% increased damage while you have a barrier. It's just a multiplier, right? So all of the damage that you're doing before, 38% more. So anything that's a big multiplier like that, you see that, you say, how do I make that work? The main thing that's giving us a barrier here is actually protection. You get a barrier for 2 seconds when you use a cooldown. We're using cooldowns all of the time, right? Like teleport in, that's a barrier. Flame Shield, that's a barrier. Frost Nova, that's a barrier. Deep Freeze, that's a barrier. Although you're going to lose the barrier. It's only 2 seconds by the time Deep Freeze is over. This is the big one, right? Damaging an elite will give you a barrier for 10 seconds. So as long as you don't get hit, if you're fighting an elite, you're going to have a barrier a good chunk of the time. So yeah, I think that this one is a big one to go for as well. I think number one is probably the Avalanche one. It's going to be like pretty night and day once you get a good enough lucky hit for sustaining your mana. And then after that, this one was very noticeable. Ice Shards pierces 4 times, dealing 25 to 20% less damage per enemy hit. This way, I don't even have to worry about using my cooldowns all the time. Sometimes I can teleport in, do 1 Ice Shards. It'll pierce through all the enemies. Normally, it just hits 1, sometimes ricochets, but doesn't do that much. But with this one, you can teleport in, pierce them all, and you don't have to worry about, you know, only hitting 1 guy, not ricocheting. I think this is basically the second one you go for right after Avalanche. But yeah, you just want to get those 2 right away. And then this one is really only after you get the Raiment of the Infinite. Distant enemies have an 8% chance to be stunned, whatever, when they hit you, but you deal up to 40% increased damage, multiplicative, right? That's another 40% damage to stunned enemies, right? So all of these different multipliers, imagine if you're doing 100 damage times 40% more because you did a barrier, 140 damage times 40% more, right? These are each individual multipliers. This is really how you scale your damage. Then in the body armor, I'm using ruby gems. In the weapon, we want to use emerald. And in the jewelry, I am using skulls for more armor. And this is based on the information that resistances are kind of bad. That might be out-of-date knowledge. I don't know. Definitely alter this to resistance-based things if that ends up being better later on. In terms of consumables, the best in slot one, until you get 100% lucky hit, in my opinion, is the Combatant Fortune. You want to use this elixir. 30% increased lucky hit is absolutely crazy, right? When I have this active, I do not run out of mana. I have 100% mana all the time. This is the best in slot, and then the next one after that would be a Precision Elixir, in my opinion. Just more critical strike chance, procs other stuff, more damage. If you don't care about procs, but you want more raw damage, you can use Savagery once you have higher crit chance. And then I guess you can go for the one that gives you more life or more armor or anything like that if you want to do something a little bit more defensive. Fortitude or Iron Barb or something like that can be really good, you know, if you're in like a scary situation. All right, and then in terms of the Paragon tree, also for reference, this template is entirely based off of Pelstron's video. Definitely show him a lot of love. I'll link his version of it in the description below. I have a couple changes here. I'm not doing exactly what he's doing it. I tuned it for myself, but you know, a lot of this is based on exactly what he did, and I didn't make like a lot of changes. Definitely show him a lot of love. He's an incredible build creator in Path of Exile, and he's already sharing like more optimized versions of builds in Diablo than, you know, some other people right now. The Paragon board, I am doing exactly what he put in his video as well. So I don't know exactly what a perfect high-level Paragon board looks like, but he also said that in his video. Like a Paragon stuff, we're still trying to figure it out. It is not a solved art yet. There's a lot of variety and options that we can do, like going for things that are figuring out what's best, what glyphs are best, especially in the world where glyphs got nerfed really bad. What is the right thing to do with Paragon? We don't know yet, right? Just be very flexible when it comes to this. And luckily, you know, they're very easy to respec. You know, right click, left click. Very cheap, 2,000 gold, whatever. What I'm doing here, this is my initial board, going up through, you know, non-physical damage, going to this glyph socket, we are using destruction. This gives us increased critical damage for every dexterity, as well as a more damage multiplier for critical strikes. This might not be the best in slot. There's a lot of glyphs here. I haven't explored it too much. This is what Pelstron recommended. Take it with a grain of salt. I have this little dangly dexterity over here and over here just to activate the glyph. Then we're going up to the left side, increase non-physical damage, which we're doing, as well as bonus intelligence. Then we're going up here. Then we are choosing the Frigid Fate board for our second board. Dealing cold damage to vulnerable enemies increases your lucky hit chance up to 15%. Right? So this gives us 15% more additive lucky hit. So remember my 53% lucky hit after I've hit 15 times in 5 seconds, which is pretty darn often, right? And we're hitting a ton. That 53 actually goes to 68% lucky hit. Just like that, which is pretty awesome. I went over to advantage, an additional 5% lucky hit, 5% lucky here, another 5% lucky here. Again, right? Like the stats that I said earlier, this is what we're going for. Damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, you know, that just a little bit of defense right here. And then for the third board, right, because we're basing so much of our damage on doing it against burning enemies, we can actually use the Burning Instinct board right here, which is kind of like whatever. We actually have it rotated, so we don't even go for Burning Instinct. We just want to go for these nodes here that make us do increased damage against burning enemies. Right now, I'm going for Safeguard at the moment. This is just damage reduction from elites. I'm going to grab all this. We get some armor. We get stuff like that. You know, this will make us a lot more defensive as we're doing Nightmare Dungeons. Smoldering Embers right here, more damage reduction. And then for the glyph that we're going to go here, we're going to go for Exploit, which gives us increased damage to vulnerable enemies per dexterity, as well as for the additional bonus, a 10% more damage multiplier. That's the Paragon tree. That's the gear. That's what I got right now. That's my plan at the moment. Like I said, I am level 66. I am farming tier 21 plus Nightmare Dungeons pretty darn easily. My chagrin is that I don't know if there's another Sorc build that feels quite this good, but the benefit is this Sorc build itself feels basically like, I don't know, it might be like, it's pretty darn close to like my platonic ideal, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, if you want a Sorc build, if you're feeling kind of bad about whatever you're playing, if you went hipster like I did, embrace the meta. It's the meta for a reason. I am disappointed that there really isn't anything else, like I said, that feels this good, but this does feel so good. Just play what everyone else is playing, have a good time, enjoy the game as it is. We'll keep our fingers crossed that season 1, you know, drops new interesting stuff that really expands the variety of what's possible. Like, I'm sure a lot of stuff pops off really well later on, like we know Arclash does. If you're in those tier 3 doldrums, whatever off-meta build, or honestly, off-meta is playing not this build. Any build that's not this build. If you're in like middle of tier 3, end of tier 3, and your build feels kind of flat, and you're just like, I'm not getting gear upgrades, and I'm not doing enough damage, and I just need something better, this is the build, man. Like, really, I started playing it without any of this gear. I had like none of these mandatory affixes, and I immediately started doing content that was twice as hard. Yeah, I can't recommend it enough. For real, this is the game that made me appreciate Diablo 4 a lot more and have me more excited for playing it, and I'm really looking forward to, you know, when season 1 drops in a few weeks. So yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing and hanging out. I appreciate it, and I'll see y'all next time. Goodbye.